Why does a single piece of green paper control the entire world? Think about it. There are currencies worth more than the US dollar, the British pound, the Kuwaiti dinar, even the euro at times, but none of them have the power of the dollar. The dollar is everywhere. It's in international trade, it's in oil, it's in the savings of foreign governments. In fact, over 80% of all global transactions are done in US dollars. So here's the question. How did an American currency become the world's currency? And why does it still dominate today, even when other economies rise, other currencies compete, and technology tries to reinvent money altogether? This story doesn't start in Wall Street. It doesn't even start in Washington, D.C. It begins centuries ago with a silver coin, a coin that traveled across oceans, fueled empires, and eventually laid the foundation for the dollar we know today. But here's the twist. The dollar's power was never guaranteed. It was built on war, on oil, on politics, and on choices that reshaped the global economy. And today, as countries like China, Russia, and the BRICS alliance push back, as digital currencies emerge, as people question America's dominance, we're left wondering, can the dollar hold on forever, or is its reign finally starting to crack? This is the story of the dollar, where it came from, why it matters, and why, whether you love it or hate it, you can never escape it. Long before the green bills we know today, there was silver. In the 1500s, the Spanish Empire struck a coin called the Spanish dollar, also known as the piece of eight. It wasn't just money, it was global. From Europe to Asia to the Americas, merchants trusted it because it was simple, reliable, and backed by precious metal. It became the first truly international currency. When the American colonies needed money, what did they use? Not their own currency, they used the Spanish dollar. So when the United States finally declared independence, the Founding Fathers faced a choice. What should America's money be? They didn't invent something completely new. Instead, they built on what the world already trusted. In 1792, Congress passed the Coinage Act. The United States dollar was born. $1 was defined as a fixed amount of silver. And just like that, America tied its future to metal and to the trust the Spanish dollar had already built across the globe. But here's where the story gets interesting. The dollar wasn't powerful yet. The US was still a young, fragile country. Other currencies, the British pound, the French franc, were stronger. The dollar had to fight for legitimacy. It did this by tying itself to gold and silver and by riding on the back of America's growing economy. And of course, the symbol we see today, the dollar sign, has its roots in this era. Most historians believe it came from the abbreviation PS, meaning peso in Spanish. Over time, the S was written over the P, eventually morphing into the dollar sign. So, the US dollar's identity wasn't born in isolation. It was borrowed. It was adapted. It was a smart branding move on a global scale. From the very beginning, America understood money is about trust, and the way to gain trust is to link yourself to something the world already believes in. The dollar's origin story was not about dominance, it was about survival. And yet, this survival strategy planted the seed for what would one day become the most powerful currency in the world. For more than a century, the dollar slowly grew in influence, but it was still in the shadow of the British pound, the world's reserve currency at the time. Then came the turning point, World War II. The world was shattered, Europe's economies were in ruins.
The British Empire, once the global financial powerhouse, was drowning in debt. And who was left standing? The United States. Its factories were booming, its gold reserves were unmatched, its military power was unrivaled. The stage was set for the dollar to take center stage. In 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in New Hampshire. Their mission? To rebuild the global financial system. And at the heart of that system, the US dollar. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar became the anchor of the global economy. Every other currency was tied to it, and the dollar itself was tied to gold. $35 would buy you 1 ounce of gold, guaranteed. This gave the world something priceless, stability. It also gave the United States something even more valuable, trust. trust. From that moment on, international trade flowed through the dollar. If a country wanted oil, machines, or raw materials, chances are they needed dollars. The pound sterling had reigned for a century, but by the 1950s, the dollar had officially taken its crown. And for everyday Americans, this meant something extraordinary. Their money wasn't just national, it was global. But behind the scenes, there was a flaw in the system, one that would eventually break it. Because while the dollar was pegged to gold, the United States was quietly printing more dollars than it had gold to back up. The seeds of a crisis had been planted, and soon the dollar would face its greatest test. By the 1960s, cracks were forming in the Bretton Woods system. On paper, the dollar was backed by gold, but in reality, America was spending far more than it could afford. Wars, social programs, foreign aid, dollars were pouring out of the U.S. faster than gold reserves could keep up. Foreign governments started to notice, and they did the logical thing. They asked to exchange their dollars for gold. Gold reserves in Fort Knox began to shrink. Confidence in the system started to waver. Then came the breaking point. In 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and announced what became known as the Nixon shock. The United States would no longer convert dollars into gold. Just like that, the gold standard was dead.
To take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators.
The world now had to trust the dollar on faith alone. This could have been the end of the dollar's dominance. A currency with no gold behind it should have collapsed. But instead, the U.S. pulled off one of the greatest financial maneuvers in history. It turned oil into the new gold. In the 1970s, Washington struck a deal with Saudi Arabia and other major oil producers. The arrangement was simple. Oil would only be priced and sold in U.S. dollars. If Germany wanted oil, they needed dollars. If Japan wanted oil, they needed dollars. And since every country on Earth needed oil, every country needed dollars. This system became known as the petrodollar. It gave the dollar a new backbone, one even stronger than gold: energy. And it gave the United States unmatched leverage, because controlling the currency of oil meant controlling the lifeblood of the global economy. From then on, the dollar was more than paper. It was power, military power, economic power, geopolitical power. The gold standard was gone, but in its place stood something even more enduring: a world economy that revolved around the dollar, and by extension, around the United States. So here's the big question. If the dollar is no longer backed by gold, if the United States has massive debt, and if other currencies like the euro or the Chinese yuan exist, why does the dollar still dominate the world economy? The answer comes down to three things: trust, network, and Mo. First, trust. For better or worse, people still trust the U.S. The United States has never defaulted on its debt. Its institutions, banks, courts, contracts are seen as reliable. When global crises hit, investors don't run to the yuan or the ruble, they run to the dollar. Second, network effect. The dollar is everywhere because the dollar is everywhere. It's the global reserve currency, meaning central banks around the world stockpile it. Today, nearly 60% of all foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. If you're a small country making deals, it's easier to use dollars than to negotiate in dozens of different currencies. The dollar is the default language of money. And third, liquidity. The US dollar has the financial markets in the world. If you need to move billions, even trillions, there's no market more liquid than the US Treasury bond market. It's like the world's safest vault, and everyone wants access. This combination creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Everyone uses the dollar because everyone else uses the dollar. And once a currency reaches that level of dominance, it's incredibly hard to replace. Even countries that dislike US influence, like China or Russia, still rely on the dollar for trade. Even giant corporations price goods in dollars. Even commodities like oil, wheat, and metals are dollar-denominated. Here's the irony. The
The dollar is not the strongest currency by value, but it doesn't need to be. Its strength lies not in its price, but in its role. It's not just America's currency anymore, it's the world's. And that gives the United States an almost invisible power. The ability to borrow cheaply, to sanction enemies, and to shape global markets all with the push of a button. For decades, the dollar has reigned supreme. But today, for the first time in generations, its dominance is being openly challenged. Take China. Beijing wants the yuan to play a bigger role in global trade. It's pushing for oil deals priced in yuan and building institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Bank to rival Western finance. Or look at Russia. Cut off from the dollar system after invading Ukraine, Moscow has doubled down on selling energy in rubles or yuan instead. Then there's the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now expanding to include countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran. Their leaders openly talk about creating a new shared currency to bypass the dollar. And beyond geopolitics, there's technology. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin imagine a world without centralized control. Meanwhile, central banks are experimenting with digital currencies, electronic versions of national money, which could, in theory, reduce reliance on the dollar. So, is the dollar's throne finally cracking? Here's the thing. De-dollarization, the move away from the dollar, is real. Countries are experimenting. Deals are happening in yuan, euros, even rupees. But the scale is still small. The global financial system is like a giant ship, and ships don't turn quickly. For the dollar to lose its crown, one thing must happen. The world needs a true alternative that offers the same trust, liquidity, and network effect. And right now, nothing comes close. The yuan is tightly controlled by Beijing. The euro is powerful, but Europe is fragmented. Crypto is volatile. Gold is stable, but not practical for modern trade. So while the headlines scream about the end of the dollar, the reality is different. The dollar may face challenges, yes, but for now, it remains the world's default. The currency of oil, of trade, of savings. And here's the paradox. The very uncertainty of the world, wars, crises, instability, actually strengthens the dollar. Because when things fall apart, people still run to the US dollar as the ultimate safe haven. So, the future.
It's not about whether the dollar will vanish. It's about how long it can hold on to its unique, almost magical position as the currency that never sleeps. So let's go back to our question. Why does a single piece of green paper control the world? The answer isn't just history. It isn't just gold or oil or politics. It is trust. From the Spanish silver coin to Bretton Woods to the petrodollar system, the dollar has always survived by being the currency the world can rely on. Not because it's the most valuable, not because it's the most beautiful, but because it became the one thing everyone else needed. And that's the secret. The dollar isn't just money. It's influence, it's power. It's the quiet hand shaping global trade, war, peace, and everyday life. Will it last forever? Probably not. History shows us that no empire and no currency stays on top forever. But for now, the dollar still wears the crown. And whether you're buying oil, trading stocks, or just sipping coffee in a small cafe somewhere in the world, chances are the greenback is quietly there in the background. It is, for now, the currency that never sleeps. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, let me know in the comments. Do you think the dollar's reign is ending soon, or will it stay on top for decades more? But for now, the dollar still wears the crown.